Journal. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. You've joined the panel Sustaining Journalism Through Relationships, otherwise known as Marketing 101 for Journalism. Because a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is well known in fields beyond journalism, but for a bunch of reasons that we're going to discuss in depth, we're more and more talking about relationships today. So let's talk really quickly about why we're here, the why now of this panel. And there's a bunch of themes that are being covered in much greater depth in other panels.
Oh, it's not on the screen. Do you need that?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
I'm mirroring my... So is my display being mirrored?
That was a dry run. That was good.
Yes, please. Please be patient. So I'm not mirroring. Brilliant. Good. That's weird. Anyways, back to the program. So why are we talking about relationships now? There are a bunch of things, a bunch of trends that are kind of flowing together that are happening right now that make relationships very relevant in newsrooms, and we are all now in the relationships business, whether we like it or not. And those trends include the shift to audience revenue, increasing number of newsrooms that are starting as subscription models or converting to subscription models or using different kinds of subscription models and metered paywalls. So there's a lot of different ways that we're depending on our readers instead of advertisers for revenue. That's a big trend. The rise of engaged journalism, so getting beyond journalism as a one-way broadcast or transmission to a conversation. That's being covered in depth in other panels. And if news is a conversation, we need to ask ourselves who needs to be part of that conversation? Who do we need to bring into that conversation? Of course, the decline in trust is happening globally. So we have to ask ourselves as newsrooms, how do we rebuild trust, and with whom do we need to rebuild trust? And these are questions that relate to relationships. Who do we have relationships with? Who do we choose to have relationships with? And of course, the collapse of the underlying business model of much of journalism, which at least digitally has been based on scale and clicks and traffic. And if we're not, sustaining our business through traffic alone, then how do we earn people's attention in this very noisy information environment? How do we hold and keep that attention over time? And then again, the same question is, whose attention do we need to earn? And these are not questions that journalists have, historically had to ask themselves. We've been separated from the business side of journalism, and proudly so, and rightfully so in some cases. But that distancing from the business of journalism has kind of kept us from asking some really hard questions about who we're serving and why, and those are questions we'll get to in a bit here. So I run a company called Ground Source, which is a platform and a service that helps newsrooms and brands develop loyalty through text messaging and other forms of conversation. And we like to talk about how loyalty and relationships aren't about a one-off transaction. It's about a relationship over time, and that relationship can go from, it can take different forms from low attention and low participation but the goal is over time to move relationships to higher attention and higher participation. There's a lot of different metaphors you're going to hear today for relationships. Some people talk about a funnel, an escalator, a ladder. We'll get to other ones too. So there's a lot of metaphors. Choose the one you like the best, but the idea is that we're now in the relationships business. So I'll let the panelists introduce themselves and give a little, some comments about their work and how it relates to relationships. And we'll start with Mary to my right here.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
So my name is Mary Walter Brown, and I'm the CEO of the News Revenue Hub. We're based in the U.S. We're a nonprofit organization that helps other news organizations develop, build, maintain, and grow membership programs, so reader revenue programs that are all based on relationships. And we do that.
Do you want me to click through it?
Oh, yeah, I'm clicking through my own. This is not helping you whatsoever. So we provide a variety of services from like the back-end technology that allows you to automate and segment and ensure that you're having these relationship building conversations with your audience, along with the front-end consulting that helps them actually write the copy and make sure that they're consistently having those conversations. You know, and it might seem really obvious that we want to have relationships with our audience and that we want to engage with our audience, but in reality, those are all pretty ambiguous terms. And so what we set out to do is to actually put a practical process and structure around what it means to build a relationship. How do you do that? How do you measure if you're doing that, and how do you continue to do it better? So we're working with 35 plus different organizations around the United States. Some of them have a global audience. And so what that really affords us is a real-time learning lab to do experimentations on how do you build a relationship with your audience, how do you engage with your audience, and how do you know if you're doing a good job. So one of the first conversations we have when clients come to us and say we want to join is, you know, is membership really right for you? And obviously the first question is always, you know, do you need the money? And it's always yes. But then we start to drill down a little farther into, you know, do your readers find you essential? Do you have the support at the executive level? I mean, and that's a really big question, because this isn't, building a relationship with your readers isn't just a development team responsibility. It has to come from the top. There has to be a culture shift. And for there to be a culture shift, they first have to understand what it even means. And so we really help them go in and methodically understand what it means to build a relationship. Are they willing to invest the time and the money and the energy into this? You don't build relationships with someone by talking to them twice a year during a spring campaign and a year-end campaign. That's not a relationship. A relationship is talking to your readers all the time about who you are, what you represent, what your vision is, being just incredibly transparent about the business model. You know, half of our funding used to come from advertising and classifieds in the United States. That is no longer the case. How are we supposed to make our money, and what is the reader's role in that? That's relationship building, that's honesty, that's showing vulnerability. Will your editorial team create products and content that your audience really truly cares about and needs? And that's a tough question to confront, especially when you have metrics showing you otherwise. So you have to be willing to really face that. And do you have the staff and the expertise internally to run a membership program? And a lot of times they didn't, and that's why we created the News Revenue Hub, to be able to help them do this so that they can focus on doing what they do best and what they like doing best, which is writing content and producing good journalism. So it's been really important for us to help people wrap their head around what it means. What are we trying to do when we talk about relationship building? And you may have seen this slide at a session I did yesterday, but we call it the relationship continuum. We're starting with the casual reader, right? That's the random hookup. They've bounced to us from Facebook, Twitter, they've searched a term on Google, they land on the site, they look around, they see some cute things, but how do they really know that they want to come back here directly tomorrow? Well, the key is they have to be offered something that means something to them. We call it gateway products, right? Like if I land on an investigative news website and I've never been an investigative news consumer, the barrier to entry is quite high. But if I were offered a simple 5 things you need to know newsletter that hits my inbox every Friday, that's a much lower barrier to entry. And so helping our clients sort of strategically understand, how do you slowly build that relationship? Once we get them in what we call the committed relationship, that's when we have their email, they're in our funnel, and we then trigger the beginning of a pretty long get to know you series where they get 1 email per week right after they subscribe that helps them understand, I'm the CEO, I'm the editor-in-chief, this is our business model, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is how we used to be funded, and this is how we're funded now. And slowly this becomes, it ramps up to where the reader feels completely engaged, completely a part of the organization, and then will eventually be confronted with the ask of, will you help invest in this kind of content so we have it tomorrow? And by that time, they're much more primed. They feel like they're in a relationship as opposed to just a consumer who's being asked to transact something in order to have access to content. So the way we envision a funnel is more as an escalator. So a funnel is large at the top and small at the bottom. What we're trying to do is move people up the escalator from being that random hookup to being a regular visitor to the site directly, to being an email subscriber, from there becoming a member, and then retaining them. And so this is so for us, we're converting about 5% across the board of our subscribers. And we found that it's not just good enough to have a large list of email subscribers. You need a high percentage of that list to be loyal, so that can be measured in 4- and 5-star MailChimp responders, recipients. We found that the 4- and 5-star MailChimp recipients, on average, you earn 3 times as much per every 100 subscribers. So it's not just about getting subscribers, it's about getting loyal subscribers, and that goes back to those products that really build loyalty. So again, as opposed to having this ambiguous idea of engagement and relationship building, we actually have metrics around it that can tell them how they're doing at building a relationship. So they can measure themselves, locals can measure themselves against other local organizations in the hub. Regional and statewide organizations can measure themselves against others. Same with single subject and national. So we know how we're doing at growing our audience. We know how we're doing at acquiring those random hookups into committed readers. We know how well we're doing at converting them and then at retaining them. So I think it's important to build relationships, but it's also important to understand that it's relationship building with a purpose. It's engagement with a purpose, and without those metrics around it, it's much more difficult to quantify how you're doing at it. I'm just going to go backwards to this. This really struck me. I'm sure many of you have subscribed to Ben Thompson's Stratechery newsletter, and I really thought that it was really interesting when he really surmised that what successful publishers are selling is the opportunity to invest in a meaningful news operation. They're not paying for the article that they just read, right? Once it's produced, it's been paid for. What you're investing in, even if you're a paid subscriber and you are a part of that transactional relationship, what you're investing in is the content that's going to be produced, that can be produced, that's ready to be produced when an important story breaks. And frankly, we do not frame it that way when we're talking to our audience. And so a lot of this is ripe for the telling. We just need to take the time to talk to our audience about it in a meaningful way that is much, much more compelling as a selling option. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who can talk about, with more practicality, how you do that.
You're going to skip ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
While Jen's preparing her slides, I saw a stat, and someone's going to have to get the right numbers for me, but they recently did a survey of Americans about local news, and the perception was 70% of people thought their local news site was doing well. And the reality is obviously nowhere near that number. And around 14% are actually, sustainable. So someone can fact check those numbers for me, but I think it speaks to that need that we've never felt as an industry before to explain what we do and how we do it, and to talk about how we need, to pay for the journalism that we produce. And I think that's the environment we're in now. So,
Right on. Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Brandel. I run a company called Harkin, and I was up too late at the Brofani last night and forgot to put an introductory slide here, so I'll give you a little bit of background. Harkin is a company that helps news organizations better listen to those they serve, and what that looks like in reality is that the public becomes part of the editorial process. They're not just the consumer of the product, they are actually a co-creator of that product, and that means they can participate by asking questions, voting, being part of the story, and actually being responsible for shaping the coverage they get. And for us, we help news organizations think about the public not as a consumer, but as a partner. And that means the news organization goes from being a parent, thinking about, this is what we think you need to know, or this is what we think you want, to becoming a servant and asking, what do you not know that we can find out for you? So it really changes the social contract between the public and the news organization. We work with about 150 newsrooms worldwide right now. We're about a 4-year-old company. And what we're finding is that when you treat the public as a co-creator, everything gets better. all of your metrics get better, your subscriptions get better. And it makes sense if you've ever worked in organizing or any other field, you know that if people are involved, they're more likely to pay. They're more likely to support you because they feel part of your mission, because they are. It's not, window dressing or a cosmetic thing. They are actually part of what you're doing, and they want to support that, and they want to be involved. And so when I travel around and I talk to newsrooms about what they're doing for engagement, I hear a lot of different metrics that they look at to see whether or not they're engaging with the public. And so I made a little chart just in my own mind to keep it a little organized as to what are those metrics that show whether or not you're quote unquote engaging the public. And I think there is kind of a depth chart here and a thermometer. The darker red, the deeper that relationship is, and the more love and loyalty and actual relationship there is to speak of. So if you treat the public as a consumer, you might look, if you're doing well in engagement, by how many clicks you're getting, or how much engaged time, or if people are returning to visit what you're doing. You're looking at them purely as someone consuming the stuff that you're making. And then a lot of times newsrooms, of course, are looking at engagement in terms of marketing. So if you've liked something, given it a heart on Twitter, if you've shared it, if you've commented, if there's other people who are copying what you're doing, then you know that your stuff is getting out into the world. Where Harken operates is at the lower end of the spectrum here. That's a deeper relationship of working with the public and looking at them as a co-creator. So this is a non-extractive relationship. This is a really additive relationship. And with that, you're looking at the quality of the comments, and you're actually listening to those comments, and you're changing what you do based on what people are saying. In Harken's case, we work with newsrooms to treat the public as a contributor by asking questions, voting, participating in stories. And then if you're looking at them as a shareholder, this is when they actually become a member or become a subscriber or in some way give you money to support what you're doing. Then you're getting their email address or their phone number. They're getting closer to you. They become a paying subscriber. And then I hate this because it's still kind of marketing speak, but you can quote unquote upsell. So you might have a paid event or a course that you want to take them through, or some other way that they can be part of your coverage, be part of your organization. So what we do at Harken is we really start at the co-creator level, and we think that's the best lever to actually create that feedback loop for all the other things. What we found from our research and from our partners is that if you start by treating the public as a partner, then they will naturally become a deeper consumer of what you're doing, they will become a better marketer of what you're doing, and they will become a shareholder of what you're doing. So that right there is the key, is really reframing your relationship with the public as one that can help you pre-publication, not just post-publication. And so you'll hear a lot about different metaphors. So sorry, Mary and I have like similar language here, and we're going to get to ladders and funnels. But we jokingly, not actually jokingly, it's serious. Audience engagement is like a marriage, just like Mary was saying. So we call it the audience engagement ring. And so what this means is that it's a positive feedback loop, that the newsroom invites feedback from the public gives feedback, and then the third point, which is where most newsrooms fall down and where engagement becomes extractive, is if they don't actually use that feedback. We talk to a lot of newsrooms who say, we got 10,000 comments on this story. And then I say, and then what? What did you do with those? We got 10,000 comments on the story. They just feel great because they got a high number, but they didn't listen, it didn't change their editorial coverage, it didn't influence how they think about the world, they're just looking at it quantitatively. So for us, that's not engagement until they do something with that. And then in the middle here, it might be a little hard to see, but there's, the diamond on the ring of engagement is when you show the public that their feedback matters. When you take it and then you reflect back to them that their actions are something that influence what you're doing. And that's also a place where a lot of newsrooms fall down. They take a lot and then they don't share that the public was actually helpful to them. And so in terms of our definition of engagement, just to put it plainly, if there's no pathway for input from your audience to shape that content decision, then for us it's not engagement. It's marketing, distribution, other sorts of things. So engagement happens when members of the public are responsive to newsrooms, and newsrooms are in turn responsive to members of the public. That's our definition. I know we can't change the vocabulary of the whole industry about what the word engagement means, but when we talk about engagement, that's what we mean at Harken. And so what we're finding, not surprisingly, is that when the public is engaged and they're part of the storytelling, the stories perform way better. So here's a third-party study that shows one of our partners in San Francisco, their public-powered stories perform 11 to 15 times better every time. So these stories are more engaging because the public is reflected in them. They're included in these stories, which is really exciting. We see this time and time again, our partners having their top story of the month, of the year, when the public is involved in that storytelling. And then kind of moving down the funnel, so to speak, we also have a technology platform to support this approach. And when people ask a question to a newsroom to be involved, if they're given the opportunity to sign up for a newsletter, 56% of them do. This is a huge lead generator for people who might become paying subscribers. And so we're even seeing our partners launching their own newsletters based on this coverage because it's so popular and it's so beloved by those who are part of that feedback loop and that cycle. And then lastly, we're finding that people are up to 2 to 5 times more likely to become paying subscribers if they have participated in the storytelling. So again, it's that if you treat them as a trusted partner, they are going to treat you as a trusted partner and put in their hard-earned dollars or their attention or their insights. They're going to contribute in ways that are really valuable to your newsroom. And so in terms of funnels, I think a little bit about, there's lots of different ways to think about it, but just to make it very simple on the funnel level, is on the left, I think, is where a lot of newsrooms are, is they're trying to think about their existing people who are in their mix and kind of bring them down from awareness to engagement to converting to retaining. And that's about how the public can get closer to the newsroom. But I think what's even more powerful is if they flip that equation and ask, how can the newsroom get closer to the public? And when the newsroom starts to open up its processes and get closer to the public, what we do as a company is help them do that mindset shift, that culture shift, walk them through new experiences of co-creating with the public until those reporters, producers become evangelists, and this becomes the new norm. And essentially what this does is it takes the funnel that you might have right now, and it goes from this to this, because suddenly you have so many more people who are in your editorial team. Essentially, your entire audience is part of your editorial team now. So you have many more people from which to learn from, collaborate with, pay you, all of that good stuff. And so just to sum it up, quite simply, is that the more your audience feels heard and the more that they see you're serving them directly, the more likely they are to trust and support you. And I forgot to also put in a slide in there that does show this creates more trust in the relationship as well. So that's the quick story of Harken, is having people be actually involved in your storytelling makes for deeper relationships and more subscriptions and more support for your newsroom.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ariel Rollnick. I'm the fund director at the Membership Puzzle Project. We're a public research project at NYU that helps develop knowledge in the struggle for sustainable public service press. I specifically run the Membership and News Fund, which provides financial runway and coaching to newsrooms around the world that are experimenting with membership in ways that can give us new understandings of what context membership can work in and how it can work. As we're evaluating applications, one of the key things that we are looking for, and I think why this ties into this panel, is we need to see that organizations are already developing relationships with their readers before they ask for money, both from us and from those readers. And so we spend a lot of time looking at how those organizations are talking to their readers, how they're listening to them, and how, as Jen said, they're sort of reflecting back to those readers what they're hearing from them. I think a lot about sort of preemptive membership asks, as Pia Frey, the founder of Opiary, once described reader revenue requests that came too early as showing up to a Tinder date with an engagement ring. And so I'll talk a little bit today about how you can avoid being that news organization or that person. Before I get into that, though, I wanted to, give a little bit of an indication of how much membership in news has exploded in like the last 2 years. At MPP on our site, we have what we call the Membership and News Database, and we now have more than 120 organizations around the world that derive some part of their revenue from a membership program. Sometimes it's also coupled with subscriptions or donations, but there's just been an incredible explosion the last couple years, and I think that is a direct result of a lot of the relationship building work that we're seeing news organizations do before they make that ask. One thing at MPP that is sort of at the center of our work, and I want to bring up today, so we're sort of operating from the same place of understanding, is the difference between subscription, donations, and membership. All three of these models are absolutely valid ways to derive revenue from your community, but I think it's really important that we understand the differences between each. Subscriptions are, it's a transactional relationship. You're paying money to get access to a product. And this can work really well for a number of organizations, especially if they're doing like really high-end content, like really excellent work. New York Times, Washington Post, obviously have incredible success with their subscription model. In a donations model, you're entering into a charitable relationship. You're giving without necessarily expecting something in return. That's obviously quite present in the philanthropic world because you're often donating to causes in the hopes that you will never actually need the services that they provide. Membership, though, is a two-way exchange. Community members give their time, their money, their connections, their expertise to support a cause they believe in. In exchange, you show up for them. And so membership is about looking at the readers as more than revenue and considering what else they'll offer to your reporting. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about what relationship building can look like at the micro sort of operations level in your newsroom. At this point, you've probably heard a lot of high-level conversations about what membership can look like. So I'm going to take a couple steps back and talk about the sort of touchy-feely part of getting people into your funnel, I think. This is how you build that sort of essentiality that Mary said earlier is essential to building a membership program. And this is going to be essential whether you're subscription-based or membership-based or donation-based. And I think an important thing to underscore, because you hear a lot about these really ambitious projects like live storytelling events and beautiful magazines and things like that. And I think there's a misconception that you need to be doing some sort of massive, really impressive project to build relationships with your readers. And it's really much more about the sort of day-to-day touch points with them and having like this constant small feedback loop in which they feel like you're on the other end of the screen or the phone or whatever it might be. And that is possible to do in a 3-person newsroom or a 200-person legacy newsroom that doesn't yet have these processes in place. I speak about this sort of with my previous hat. Before joining Membership Puzzle Project, I was the director of the New Tropic, which is a local media startup in Miami, Florida. And we said that our goal was to help curious locals connect to, understand, and explore their city. And so we're very much in the relationship business that Andrew and Mary and Jen have spoken of. And what we found is that if we did these 3 things here, we had this incredibly strong relationship with readers that was really hard to break. If you help someone, if you help them feel empowered, and if you show up for them before you actually need something for them, whether that's a quote, whether that's money, whether that's referrals, whatever it might be, if you're showing up for them before you come for that ask, you have this pretty unbreakable bond with them, and they're at the top of your funnel, and you're not going to lose them unless you break that contract with them through doing some sort of disservice to your relationship with them. And these are just a couple, I think, examples that I hope will ground what I mean by each of these ways to sort of have that relationship with the readers. The first quote here is coming from, it's a response to our voter guide that we did every local election at the New Tropic. We actually used Harkin to do so. And so this is one of the questions that we got in result that Harkin embed. And the reason this one sticks out to me, as simple as it is it's a really vulnerable question. It was shared via Harkin, so it was publicly viewable on our website. And this person trusted us and the community of people that we'd built around the New Tropic, that they were willing to reveal in a public forum the depth of what they didn't understand about the US political system. This is a person who wasn't a US citizen and wasn't sure if they were able to vote, and they came to the New Tropic to ask about that. And that just really sticks out to me because it's just this incredible level of vulnerability that you don't see in the news industry very often, especially in a public forum. The second one for Empower was a reply to our voter guide as well. And this came from a local entrepreneur whose parents were undocumented until she turned 21 and was able to file for citizenship for them. And this was their first election that they voted because every previous election that had come along, they saw the ballot, which is written in incredible jargon that's hard even for native English speakers to understand. And they felt like they didn't understand it. And so they just opted out of voting. And this is a moment where we have that woman and her parents probably for good because we help them elect leaders that they felt like they could stand behind. Another one here is it dovetails a lot with what we hear about MPP, which is that members really appreciate when you're respectful of their time. And so at the New Tropic, our core product was a daily newsletter that really kind of gave people a cheat sheet for the city for the day. And what we heard again and again is like, you are sort of essential to me living my life in a way that feels controllable. It feels like you guys are on my side in the battle to control the information influx that is happening to me every day. So these are like 3, I think, hopefully really easy, digestible ways to build those relationships with your readers that feel very manageable, whatever the size of your newsroom is. We were a 3-person team, so it's totally manageable in a really small context. And this here is a little bit of an elaboration on how MPP thinks about what members might want to contribute in exchange. So you're doing all these things, you're helping them, you're empowering them, you're showing up for them. And it's not a one-way relationship, you get things back. And so these are some of the things that we see readers, listeners, viewers say to MPP through a lot of the deep studies we've done with organizations and their most loyal members. They want to learn with you. They want to show their expertise. They want to be heard, and to the point that Jen said, they want to be heard and then see that work reflected back. They want the inside scoop, and they want to find out about your process. They want to share what they're really passionate about. You'll be surprised if you open up your doors to how many times readers will come and offer to do things for you. And they want to be a part of something bigger. They want to be a part of a community. The thing you hear again and again with organizations who do a really great job building relationships is they sort of see the broader community built around that publication or that news organization as their tribe. And they feel like they're part of something every time they open up that newsletter or they receive that text message or they receive their magazine in the mail. This is a little bit of an elaboration on that, but here are some of like the very granular things that you might get from somebody who feels they have a relationship with you. They might recommend you, they might come to your event, they might send you tips, they might send you introductions. This is a really powerful thing because they're vouching for you. And so you can get introductions to communities that you would normally not be able to get introduction to because one person trusts you and they give you a line to somebody that you could normally never approach on your own. They might ask you questions. They might suggest ways for you to improve, offer their expertise, volunteer to help, and then hopefully at the end, give you money. That is sort of like, this is arranged in the sort of lightest touch to the highest touch that you might get back from that reader. And one thing that we hear a lot from people is, if I open myself up this way, what if we get completely overwhelmed? What if we start getting hundreds of questions, hundreds of requests? And this is a very valid concern. News organizations, nobody has spare time, nobody has spare resources. But what we found at the Nootropic, and I think at publications similar to ours, is that didn't happen. Most readers weren't actually going to end up inundating you with your questions. It was enough for them to see you supporting others, empowering others, showing up for others, and they sort of had this secondary relationship as a result of that. And I think one of the most important things about this, and Jen and Mary both spoke to this a little bit, is that this is a virtuous cycle, and to keep it going, you need to acknowledge the contributions that come from them and tell them what you're going to do with them. And most importantly, if you're not going to use them for whatever reason, explain that to them and explain why. Our team is too small. Like we right now our priority is on covering local elections. Right now our priority is focusing on X, and we've found that if you don't acknowledge it and you don't say why you're not doing it, you break that relationship. But if you give them a reasonable answer about why you're not able to do it, they don't get offended by the fact that you didn't act on it. They're just really happy to hear from you. So yeah, I think that's it. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Ariel. So we'll get to some questions here in just a moment. I want to start and talk a little bit, or ask the panelists a little bit about this question of scale. A lot of the work we're talking about right now is very touchy-feely, high touch. Relationship building is something that doesn't scale. And I'm wondering if there's like a Dunbar number for newsrooms, like a limit to how many relationships you can actually sustain. But how do you talk to your clients and the newsrooms you work with about, the question of like, are too many people going to show up, or if just 20 people show up at our doorstep, is that enough? Like, what's enough, and how do you train them to build those relationships, even if it starts small?
Well, I think we've seen in the news industry over and over again that a focus on quantity hasn't really served us. Whether it's on reach, we want to have as many eyeballs come to our website so we can make as much money as we can at advertising. That creates attention in which you are doing stories that probably you didn't get into journalism to do because you're trying to get people to click on things rather than to serve a community's information need. So to us, we think about how do you changed the operating system of a newsroom to be optimized for speed and distribution and efficiency and these kind of scale, quantitative, get big, get fast, to a relationship where they're optimized for trust, relevance, and relationships, because ultimately that's how a lot of newsrooms are going to survive as the ad model continues to not be effective and keeping them as big as they need to be to do the job in the community. And so for us, it's if they're asking, can we get 2,000 questions? Yes, you can, but if you're only answering one, then you have 1,999 people who you've just kind of wasted their attention. So we help them kind of tune in a dial as to how much are they willing to be responsive, and then let them do that kind of work so that the supply and the demand aren't so imbalanced.
I think also to the question of can it become too big to manage? What's really powerful about membership is, at least at MPP, we define membership in a number of ways. It's not just being a paying member of an organization, but someone might also be a member of a beat or a member of sort of volunteer crew that supports the organization or something like that. And so the better you do at building this relationship, the more people come in to help you. One of the examples that we get really excited about at Membership Puzzle Project is the Reveal Center for Investigative Reporting has this newsletter called The Hate Report, and it monitors the rise of the alt-right in the US. And they wanted to monitor more of what was happening on like radio shows and podcasts and things like that, but there are only 2 reporters on that project. And so what they ended up doing through their newsletter, and they did this through our Join the Beat project at MPP, a community of practice we lead, they asked people to sign up to be what they called hate sleuths. And these people were then received training in how to sort of identify certain sort of incendiary language and different things that these reporters were looking for in order to turn bits of information from anecdotes into like actual information they could share as a trend. And they, I think, found 25 or so of these community members they heavily vetted and then trained to identify this information. And then those hate sleuths fed that information back to the reporters. And so it can also be this membership can be a force multiplier for what you're able to do. The stronger that relationship, the more you can trust community members to come in and expand your scope. Or you could do more events. Maybe people want to volunteer to just help you staff events because they believe so much in your cause reaching more people. So the Dunbar number, the better the relationships are, I think the bigger that number gets.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to manage it with your own newsroom.
Yeah. Awesome. So what questions do you have?
Is there a microphone to run? Okay.
And can you introduce yourself before you ask your question, please?
Right over here, yeah.
Hi, thanks. Yep. I'm a freelance multimedia maker, but I'm curious to see whether because you expect quite a high involvement from your readers, being co-creators in the content. What are strategies to also get low-involved target groups into the funnel or onto the ladder?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for the Harkin front, we offer a variety of ways for people to get involved because we know not everyone is going to, take the time or have a question that they want to ask, so they can also vote on each other's ideas. So a newsroom could curate, let's say, 3 to 5 questions about a topic that they get in and just let the public vote on their website or, through social media, et cetera. And that takes 10 seconds to read a small list of questions and say, ooh, that one I'd like to know the answer to most. And that's also a spot where after they vote, they can leave their email address to be alerted when that question gets answered. So again, you're showing them that their involvement mattered. So if they voted for something that won, you can let them know that they influenced how you spent your time and your reporting prowess. And so that's a quick and easy way to do it. But newsrooms can do it in tons of different ways. I'm guessing Ariel has some examples too.
Sure. I mean, I love the sort of relationship we built with our readers through Harkin at the Nootropic, but that's not for everybody. And so there are a lot of other ways that we gave opportunities to contribute. The Nootropic had a hashtag, Live Like You Live Here, that was quite popular in the city. And so one of the things is we asked readers to tag us in photos around the city showing how they live like live there. And then we would share them back out on our Instagram account with their tag. And for certain people, seeing their way of living through the city was a really rewarding relationship. And that's like a 10-second effort, right? They take the photo, they put a filter on it, they put the hashtag on it, and then they get to see it reflected out across the city. Another thing was an event calendar at the bottom of the newsletter. People could suggest events for us to include in the calendar. Maybe it was their own event, but lots of times they just sent us things like, this is really cool, I'm excited to go to it, and I feel like if more Nootropic readers go to it, I'll enjoy it more because those are my people. And so there's a lot of really light touch points that suit different kinds of people that might interact with your publication. So I think that's a really great way to think about it, is who are the different types of readers you have, and what are the things that get them excited about sharing. And if it's somebody very civically minded, they're going to really enjoy submitting questions for Harkin. But if it's somebody who's sort of that explorer, or the one who wants to show people what they're doing all the time, they're going to want to see their photo shared on your Instagram account.
So one thing, a question for you, I mean, as a freelancer, do you have people who are loyal to your work over time, or are you creating new audiences every time you write something?
It depends, of course, on the type of content, but I'm curious to see whether you can use the people who are very involved with your brand or with your organization, how they can you can use them as ambassadors for your work. Is there a way to do that?
So we have a client, Seattle Times. Their environment reporter has been using text messaging to update a community of about 1,500 people about these whales that are living off the coast of Seattle that people are really fascinated and captivated by. And she actually, she'll go out into the field, take a picture or a video, and she'll just send it with a little text message to people. And she often won't ask a question, but people will respond anyway and just say, thanks for that, Linda. So they feel like they've got her reporting in their back pocket, like she's a friend who's popping up in the messages just like, you know, other friends are. And it's created an incredible sense of loyalty, and that her project, which includes a lot of enterprise reporting in the newspaper, has led to several hundred subscriptions. So it doesn't have to be incredibly time-consuming. You don't have to be answering every question, but just being present for people in a way that's special, I think, is important.
And one quick thing I'll add on that front, and this is a tweetable line that came to me last week, so get ready, that contributors become your best distributors when you show that they matter. So whether or not it's their hashtag that you're showing on your website, they will share it with their friends if they are being seen on a news organization's site, if they're part of a story, if there are photos in the paper, if they are quoted, all of that stuff they will get excited about and share with others. So it's a way of bringing others to your work in an authentic way.
As a freelance journalist specifically, I used to be a freelancer as well, and one of the things that I did that was really great for turning my contributors into distributors was just a very basic plain text email and Gmail, and every single time I interviewed somebody, I asked for their email address and asked if I could keep them updated on my work. And then every time I had a new story published, I would pull the headline, like the first few sentences of the story, say, I just published this, please read it if you're interested, and here's what I'm thinking about working on next, or here's the country I'm going to next, are there people I should know, are there stories I should look into? And it was incredible how much, like I would just see the tweet as soon as I sent that newsletter, within a couple of hours, I'd see sources that I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe I interviewed them like 6 months ago, but sharing that story out, and there's a Vox reporter, Johnny Harris, who does a really great job at the Vox Borders Project, of bringing readers along and like showing them how their recommendations of what he should look into next show up with his work.
Question up front, gentleman here.
The gentleman in the front.
I just want to make a couple of additional points about your points. I don't know if I have a question. But Andrew, when you introduce a subject like this, I think you could also say that relationships are important because the readers have more power now. Power. So in any relationship, when the power dynamic changes, it changes the relationship. So that's how I would put it. It's another way of saying what you already said in introducing this panel. The second point I'd like to make is a little deeper one, and it's that there's a relationship between the kind of engagement we're talking about on this panel and truth-telling. And the relationship is that, like a marriage, there are going to be fights. There's going to be tension between members and journalists because journalism is so often involved in the business of telling uncomfortable truths, right? So one reason you need to build strong relationships with readers is that it creates the kind of bond that can withstand that tension, right? So the way I like to put it is engagement practices create a relationship strong enough to withstand the strain of telling uncomfortable truths. And the more power the readers have, the more important that becomes. So I'd like to see you guys in the future incorporate that connection to truth-telling in your presentation, because I think that's the kind of thing that's going to speak to a lot of hardcore journalists. That's it. It's not a question, just a comment.
If anyone, also seriously, if anyone, because I'm seeing people in the audience who I know have really great engagement experience, so feel free to add to this conversation as well. Yeah, I think there's a couple questions back here. Yeah.
Hello, Esa Mäkinen from Helsingin Sanomat, a legacy newspaper with strong digital subscription base. It seems that membership models and subscription models are converging in some way from listening to you here and previously during this festival. Do you have any thoughts on how legacy subscription media can move more into membership territory? For example, what should the New York Times do to be more membership and less subscription kind of a outlet?
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't say that any subscription outlet should make that shift unless that's something that they want to do, but there are absolutely ways that even a subscription organization, you can bring readers into your work in a way that makes them feel like they're members of your organization. One organization we've been working with is exploring the possibility of letting their subscribers, their premium subscribers, they have a couple subscription tiers, their premium subscribers contribute to their arts and culture and sort of food and beverage review section. And in order to, and once they contribute that review, it's a rebate against their subscription. And the thing that they said to us is we've shown with our editorial work that we see our readers at the center of our work. They have an incredible engagement strategy. Like, our subscription model is transactional in a way that we don't think about our readers anymore. And that really resonated with us, because that's the concern about subscription models, is that they don't necessarily reflect how news organizations feel about their readers as they open themselves up to them in editorial channels. So I would say in a subscription-based organization, think about specific projects that you do where you can bring the readers into the work, the same way perhaps the hate report reporters did. Like, what is a beat where you really need some sort of extra assistance, or an event series that you might be able to do that exists outside the paywall of the organization?
In the back there, Mike.
Thanks. I'm Mike Rispoli. I work on the News Voices project as part of Free Press. We build power in organizing communities to create a more just and equitable media system. And I really appreciate this conversation about relationships. One of the things that we've seen in our work is that newsrooms maybe aren't great at building relationships even with their most dedicated audience, but really struggle with reaching parts of the community that they aren't reaching already. And they can't necessarily just create more content in order to reach them. They have to be more intentional and deliberate about how they build relationships with people they're not already getting to. So I just didn't know if you had any good examples of newsrooms that reached beyond just their existing audience, and especially in a way to maybe like rebuild trust in communities where they had lost it previously.
Yeah, I have a quick example. So Harken, the technology platform that we have to support newsrooms, also allows you to collect zip codes or postal codes. So you can start to see, especially for local newsrooms that are trying to serve a region or an area, you can start to see where questions are coming in from, and then see who you're not hearing from. And oftentimes that is, the maps are very socioeconomically driven. So you can see a news organization might hear a lot from areas of town that are more well-resourced, have people who have higher incomes. And so when you have that knowledge staring you in the face of a map where you have very saturated points and then very empty points, you're confronted with the reality that you're not hearing from people in places that you might want to serve better. And so for them, our partners have done everything from create partnerships with local libraries, which are geographically distributed, to listen to people in those parts of town, and then to reflect their questions back and to listen to them, to create work for them. And that does work to start to rebuild a relationship, because it's starting with a gift of saying, we're going to spend time covering what you care about. So tell us how we can be of help, rather than saying, hey, you don't read our stuff, you should read it. You know, it's about making sure that you're actually reflecting their needs, their information needs in your coverage. So that's just one example of what we've seen.
We've worked on a number of projects. because the ubiquity of text messaging and how low barrier it is, it makes it really useful in environments where a newsroom or an organization wants to or needs to reach out to a community. And we've worked on a bunch of projects called Listening Posts. There's a project called the Listening Post Collective that builds community listening and media projects throughout the world. But the thing we end up working with our clients most on when they're in that environment or when they know they need to reach a community is to help them understand not only why do you want to reach that community, they may have goals in terms of their reporting, or they may have some requirements from a funder to reach certain communities, and then they may not be from those communities. So we say not only why do you need to reach those communities, but why do those communities need to be reached? What would compel them to want to step forward and have any relationship with your news organization if the only thing they've seen in their community, depending on the community, is the only time they see journalists in their community is when there's a problem, when someone's died or there's a fire or something horrible happened, instead of every day as part of the daily life of the community. So oftentimes the hard work of being present and showing up and figuring out how they can be empowered through information and news, it's really hard work. So you start from, hey, we need to reach this community because we have this goal from a funder, to this is going to take some time. And we try not to shy away from the fact that this can be very hard work, especially with communities that have historically been left out of the conversation altogether.
I think in the U.S., one of the best examples of this, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, is City Bureau in Chicago. For those who aren't in the U.S., their Documenters project trains and then compensates members of the community to go out and document the dozens of public meetings that are happening across Chicago on any given day to try and fill in the information gap about the policy decisions that are being made that are going completely unnoticed because the sort of mainstream organizations have had to cut back. And one thing that jumps out to you, and Daryl, the founder, talks about, he said it's not just about engagement, it's about equipping people. I think I just butchered his quote a little bit, but that's the gist of it. And it's a really empowering move, and they're being compensated, and they're seeing their work help change the fabric of the city. And Emily, if you want to jump in and say any more about them, feel free, because I know you work with them more closely. But
one amazing thing. Thank you. I think they're a great example. And one of the things that City Bureau does really well is a weekly public newsroom every Thursday night around the city. And the idea is, maybe sometimes those are conversations that are programmed by their staff, but very often it's community members, politicians, constituents. And the idea is, I think of it almost as like the anti-gala. It's like the anti-annual event. It is highly frequent. They're going to people where they're at, and it's so timely, and there's such high frequency that if you don't connect with them this time, there are many, many other opportunities to come and be heard in person.
I just want to say something. I feel like I'm a bit of an outlier on this panel, I guess, in some ways, because membership to me means one thing. It means sustaining an organization financially. It does mean making a contribution, however small. Our number one goal is literally sustaining journalism. And not everyone is going to want to get as deeply involved in their news organization as everyone here is explaining, and that's okay. Everyone needs to contribute in some capacity, whether it's their time or their talent, but I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we're not going to be around to even have these conversations about deeper engagement if we don't get our audience to fund us. So when we talk about membership, in the grand scheme of this, we are talking about people who are willing to fund journalism with their hard-earned dollar. I just don't want that to get lost in this conversation.
So I think we have about 2 more minutes before we need a break, and would love to hear a few more questions or comments or experiences. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for this. I'm from the local Europe, and we've got a membership model as well, so this is really interesting to hear. But my question is, when you involve members, how do you make sure that you don't just end up using people to create free content for you? I mean, I'm an editor and I get paid for my work, and yet I expect members to pay me for the privilege of just getting involved. So how do you make sure that you don't just end up using your members?
Yeah. I mean, with the work that our partners do, it's not user-generated content. It's just user-generated questions. So they're not, you know, spending much time doing work and then not getting paid for it, and not, yeah, it's not that kind of like, you do a story for us or you create free content and then we'll put it out in the world. So I don't know if others can answer, but.
The question was for all of you.
Oh, yeah.
Whoever feels.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that where that contribution originates, if it's them volunteering it because they just want to be a part of it, I think that's not an extractive relationship. We never went out and asked people to give us free photos or add things to our newsletter, but what would happen is people would reply and send them to us and say, is there any way you could use this? Could you share this? And things like that. And so I think if it's originating with them, it helps them feel a part of the product or the organization or whatever it might be. It's just important that it's coming as an offer rather than, I think, like an extractive sort of ask.
Let's take one more question.
Well, I had one more thought, just
Yeah.
in addition to what Mary was saying about membership and people contributing to the work. I think that is absolutely key and very, very important. And I also think that newsrooms, as they start to shrink, or have continued to shrink, I should say, when you look at the public as more than money, when you look at them as being able to contribute their insight, their expertise, their curiosity, their networks, all of those things, you actually make your newsroom bigger. So you can look at it in terms of your profit and loss sheet, in terms of how many people are putting money in, but you can also look at it as how much value are you getting in the editorial work that you're doing when you open up that process at the beginning. You can make your newsroom 10 times larger than it is without paying a dime, just by having really good processes in place where people can contribute their expertise, their insights, and be part of what you do. So that's another way of just looking at membership kind of in the whole model of the newsroom.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us on this first panel of the morning.
Yes.
And waking up early-ish. But we appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks.